My name is Sten Vermund. I serve as Dean of the Yale School of Public Health. But I wanted to just highlight the partnership of Yale University with the American University of Beirut. The AUB dates back more than 150 years, founded in 1866, and there were Americans who were literally fundraising to start this school in Beirut during the American Civil War, just to give you a sense, and just after the American Civil War. So the university has been a highly stable academic force with American accreditation. It was originally accredited by New York State educational entities. And all the many years, with all the trials and tribulations of the Middle East, AUB has maintained its leadership role in academia. And we're proud that that includes medicine, and it includes public health and nursing. So let me turn it over to Dr. Khusnud. We have been proud to be working with AUB for many years, and we'll be hearing from its former dean in just a moment. Dr. Khusnud.
Thank you so much, Stan. Again, I'm Kaveh Khusnud, Associate Professor, Yale School of Public Health. I've had the pleasure of knowing Dr. Iman for over a decade, and I'm delighted to introduce him to you. Dr. Iman Nuwayhid is Professor of Public Health and Occupation and Environmental Health at the Faculty of Health Sciences at the American University of Beirut. He served as the Dean for 12 years at the Faculty of Health Sciences from 2008 to 2020. He's co-editor of the landmark book on public health in the Arab world, Cambridge University Press, 2012. And he's a co-chair of the Lancet AUB Commission on Syria. His research focuses on the health of workers, including working children, environment and health, and conflict and health. I'm so delighted that Dr. Iman, who's on sabbatical right now, decided to come to Yale. He's currently in New Haven and is teaching the first ever course called Public Health in the Arab World at Yale College. Dr. Iman, thank you so much for joining us. I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Kaveh, and thank you, Dean Vermund, for your kind words. Let me start by sharing my first slide here. So before I start, I'd like to first, good afternoon to everyone who has joined. And I want to start by thanking the Institute of Global Health, the School of Public Health at Yale, and the Macmillan Center Council on Middle East Studies for hosting this presentation. I want specifically to thank the Council on Middle East Studies for hosting me for this semester at Yale, and special thanks to Professor Masha Inhon, who was the force behind it. I also would like to move the slide. So, okay. Also like to just recognize my 12 brilliant undergraduate students who took the course in public health in the Arab world. I would say they were quite an inspiration. The term shattered that you see in the title of my presentation actually is borrowed from this documentary produced by director Carol Mansour from Lebanon. And it talks mainly about her reflections on the Beirut explosion of August 4, 2020, a year later. And of course, the shattered here refers to the shattered windows and doors and structures, but also to the shattered humanity that we all experienced at that point. My objectives here, what I'd like to share with you, and I'm putting them in a form of unusually for objectives, in the form of a question, because I'm still questioning myself, and I'd like you to join me on this thinking of what lens should we use to analyze public health challenges? And I'm proposing a more or less a different way of looking at time, place, and person, and I'll explain that as we move forward. Again, this presentation is not going to be about the numerators and denominators, and rarely about prevalences, few numbers here and there. It's going to be mostly focusing on the social, political, and historical context, actually more on the political and historical, to just give a meaning to why are we in the situation that we're facing, not only in Lebanon and the region, also across the globe. What lessons can we learn to inform global public health? And what can we do all together, perhaps to achieve a further world? I'll start where you will not expect. I'm going to define my place as Minneapolis, Minnesota, my time as 25 May 22, and my person, so this is the place, time, and my person is George Floyd. George Floyd died at the age of 46 years. He's a Black American, and he was a victim of police brutality for different reasons. One of them you all know, and that's the color of the skin that he carries. One of his last words, what he whispered before he passed away, was, "I cannot breathe." And that incident started practically a wide unrest and social movement and political movement across the United States. And I would say across racial divisions and geographic divisions, all calling for justice, not only for George, justice for the minorities, the disadvantaged, the underprivileged. And I think there's an important lesson that for all of us. This was 2020. I'm going to take you 10 years back to Ben Arous on 17 December 2010. Again, place and time. Ben Arous is in Tunisia, and the person is Bouazizi. Mohammed Bouazizi was 26 years old when he again fell a victim to police brutality. He was unemployed, trying to work what was considered illegally on the street. And in reaction, he set himself on fire. His mom refers to this as an act to defend his dignity. That incident started what everybody talks about as the Arab uprising. That call for dignity, for freedom, for liberation, for a new world, actually swept the Arab world. And many countries and capitals actually saw thousands and thousands and millions of people taking to the street, demanding minimum acceptable living conditions and minimum dignity. I'll take you 10 years back, and again, a younger individual. Take you to Gaza on the 30th of September 2000. And the person in this story is Muhammad al-Durra. Muhammad was 12 years old when he was caught with his father in a crossfire between Palestinians and Israelis. And he was shot by Israeli soldiers and and his father was wounded. This took place around practically within a day or two of the start of the second Intifada in Palestine, and that extended over more than 4 years. The pictures I chose here, I chose intentionally to show you that this is a struggle between civilians against young and old, against one of the mightiest military powers in the region, if not in the globe. I can't breathe. I'd like to adopt that as a roadmap for global public health. I can't breathe represents people who are fighting racism and feeling that there's structural and systemic discrimination against them. I can't breathe is a scream by people in our region and in many countries around the world, fighting against authoritarian system, against corruption, and I can't breathe is the voice of people who are still under occupation and colonial powers. And in the three cases, what global public health can do is actually be part of this struggle, of this passage, of this journey from racism to a society or to a world where people's identity and self-realization is respected, to a world that moves from authoritarianism to perhaps countries where people are held accountable for, especially politicians, for their misdoings, where they can live in dignity and express themselves. Again, a passage, a journey, helping people go from being under occupation to a world with liberty and freedom. If you think about this, this is exactly what we do in public health. In public health, we talk about community-based movements, we talk about solidarity, we talk about action, we talk about listening to the victims, we talk about listening to our research participants. This is what I'm calling for here, is to listen to people saying, I can't breathe, and trying to work together with them to a better future. I think this sentence summarizes it all, and this is from the landmark report of the Commission on Social Determinants in 2008, that after all, social injustice is the main killer in our globe. It's a killer on a grand scale. I take all of this to sort of put it together in a model of how I myself look at public health and global public health. And I see here three determinants that actually influence what we do. One is identity, how we as individuals, as human beings, how do we see ourselves? How do we recognize our identity and what we stand for? But at the same time, this could be in contrast and in conflict with how others see us. The identity perceived by us and perceived by the other. That kind of conflict determines the health of people and priorities of people. Social determinants of health is known to all, if not most of us. It's about occupation and it's about finding employment. It's about education. It's about these opportunities for better life. But I put political determinants of health as an independent domain. And I put it on purpose there because some people claim and say that it is inclusive, it is included under social determinants. I think we need to split it out. We need to have it out there in our face, because when we talk about political determinants of health, we're talking about governance, accountability, corruption, colonialism, structural violence. This is what comes to our mind when we talk about political determinants of health, and it shouldn't be diluted by any way by just mixing it up with the overall term of social determinants of health. And those three impact our health, not only at the personal level, also at the collective and population level. The Association of Schools of Public Health, Schools and Programs of Public Health here in the US in 2020 held a leadership retreat. This is an annual event. It was virtual. The focus was on structural and systemic racism. Of course, this was driven by George Floyd's case. And one of the most profound statements I heard at the end of this panel, when the moderator asked the deans and directors, what is there one thing that you would do in your school or program addressing racism? And Dean Thomas Lavis, the dean of the Tulane School of Public Health, said, we need to teach our public health students the history of the United States of America. For me, this was a revelation. It sort of, again, speaks to many of the issues that we face, not only in our region, across the world, that there's a history and there's a background and there's a context for everything that we're living in. And he has this movement that is a book, that is a documentary, that has speeches that he refers to as the skin you are in. The skin you are in defines you. And I think this is, again, an amazing statement, because he didn't talk about the color of the skin. The skin you're in, because what's inside that skin is a human being, whose anatomy and pathology and physiology and perhaps genetics are more or less the same. What differs is that tiny thin envelope that covers our human beingness. And I think that's the kind of public health that should be talking about, crossing that barrier, crossing that skin to look at in depth at our humanity and the human beings. To add to these concepts that I'm introducing, I would like to introduce the concept of wounds or traumas. And there are three definitions or terms that are used with wounds. One, the invisible wound. We're used to talk about the visible wound, what we can see, what the physician can stitch. But we're talking about invisible wounds that we cannot see, that are pushed inside. And our job as public health people, our job as health professionals is to uncover the wounds inside. These are the wounds that are caused by discrimination, by injustice. They don't show up out there. These wounds could become intergenerational. There are now reports and studies talking about slavery and that it impacts even our genetic makeup. These wounds are transferred, and pains and sufferings are transferred from one generation to the other, and we need to keep that in mind. And then the value of wounds. It's not stable. We all know the narrative. We could know and draw the narrative and how a wound was caused. Who killed, who shot who, and who was the belligerent and who was the victim. But the value of the wound and how do we perceive it is defined politically. Veterans in this country of the Vietnam War have been treated differently than the veterans of the Gulf War in the same country. And that's defined politically with the political agenda and the mood of the country. And these values and how we see these wounds, internal and external, differ with time. To the left of the slide, there's a key. And I think this is a key that helps us understand what these wounds are. But also this key is a symbol. And maybe I can talk about it at the end or under Q&A. It is also a political symbol. Now I take you to Lebanon, and in my presentation, I'm going to zoom in and out and take you through this journey using this concept that I presented as my guideline. In Beirut, August 4, 2020, 6:07 p.m., a time that nobody would forget, this explosion took place. This explosion, now we have the time, we have the place, but this time it was not a person, this time it was a population. It was a whole collective experience. It destroyed a sizable portion of the city of Beirut. It killed more than 200 people. It destroyed tens of thousands of houses, some of them severely damaged. It destroyed hospitals and healthcare centers. 3 of these hospitals were severely damaged. More than 6,000 injuries were reported. They stormed and the emergency departments across the hospitals in Beirut and surrounding towns and cities. Not only on their own, they came with friends, they came with relatives, they came with their loved ones. Tens of thousands of people were actually roaming around the emergency rooms and around hospitals and the city of Beirut around that time. We were all worried about COVID-19 transmission. There was no way to impose any protective measure there. Lo and behold, this is August 4 here, and within weeks, the cases of COVID spread out. If this is a lesson of how politics and conflict connect with health, I think this is one of the striking examples. People would ask, what's in that plume and what kind of toxic agents we were exposed to? But in Lebanon at that time, not only people in Beirut, I think the strongest and the most common phrase used was, I can't breathe. In Arabic, I'm suffocating. people across the city and across the country were talking about suffocation and inability to breathe because of the smoke, because of the dust that was associated with the destruction, but also because of this feeling of total oppression, of feeling that this political system, this situation has robbed us of what has been left of our dignity. And again, it connects to all these individual stories that I shared at the beginning. This is again a picture where you can easily see the damage and you can easily observe the external, the visible wounds. The invisible wounds here within this lady and others are things that we need to keep observing and monitoring. And this is what matters. Because when you treat the visible wound, people are forgotten. We need to keep remembering that these wounds run deep to impact people's feelings and people's mental health. One study that was done at the American University Medical Center and our faculty jointly looked at mental health disorders among children less than 18 years old. And again, anxiety was on the rise, PTSD, and depression. Another colleague from our faculty looked at injuries and has started now a cohort of injuries. I'm working with a group across Lebanon to try to understand the interaction between environmental exposure, health outcomes, and vulnerability. Just to let you know, none of these things were funded. The first two studies were done with no funds, totally on voluntary basis. We've been reaching out to fund our third, the proposed study, for more than a year. There's no money to document what has happened. And this would be a missed opportunity, not only for Lebanon, for the whole world to learn. What can a blast like this, what can an explosion like this do to people, not only on the visible, but also on the invisible wounds. Just to share with you the context, this blast was not an incident. It's not an accident. This blast is contextualized. It's part of a stream of things that were happening in the country. We published a paper right after talking about the Beirut blast and the escalation of the crisis. At the heart of all of this is a confessional, sectarian political system. At the heart of all of this is political and economic mismanagement. And when the two things exist together, like a country in Lebanon, you have the worst combination ever. In a region that is afflicted by instability and wars. The turning point, the history is long, but the turning point was February 14, 2005, when former Prime Minister Rafiq Hariri was assassinated. That split the country. And within less than a month, we started talking about, and the country referring to, two political coalitions on blocks in 2005, the March 8 and the March 14, one with an orientation towards the east and one with an orientation towards the west. And that kind of polarization impacted how the country is being run and led to further deterioration in the management, even of the basic services provided to the citizens or the residents of the country. We actually witnessed one of the scandalous, unacceptable, and unbelievable garbage crisis that any country could see. In 2015, the country was drowning in its garbage. What you see here is this river. This river is of white plastic bags with garbage. And that's what you see at the shores and some of the towns and villages. That was another indicator of a failing of the governing system, a failing of a political system, a failing practically of a state. Electricity was started experiencing even further electricity shortages and more frequent outages. This is, by the way, the headquarters for the electricity of Lebanon. And it tells you sort of, it's an indicator of how bad the situation is. And think public health, think health outcome. No electricity means your medical equipment are not running and you have to look for alternative sources of power. This means that your food cannot be stored. This means that if it is the bad weather, you might not succumb to the weather elements, and people reverted to alternatives. And these neighborhood, these generators mushroomed all over the country. With that came air pollution, and the fact that people are, and their study was run by colleagues at the university, where it showed when you turn them off and you turn them on, practically the particulate matters and other toxins sort of go through the roof. This led to social movements. These social movements were social / environmental / political, because they followed the garbage crisis, and there were demands, part of it technical, part of it social reform, and part of it political reform. And this is where health, politics, social issues actually come together. And it's very difficult in many cases to separate them from each other. There was a hope then that perhaps these social movements, political movements, fresh young people, perhaps could impact the election, the parliamentary election 2018. It didn't happen. It didn't happen because, again, this is sort of a quick context, because the whole electoral law is based on sectarian divisions. So this is the district of Beirut 1, and we have 8 seats. 3 are reserved to the Armenian Orthodox. 1 is reserved to an Armenian Catholic, 1 for a Maronite, 1 for a Catholic, 1 for an Orthodox, and 1 for a minority. You go to Beirut 2, you have 6 for a Sunni, 2 for Shiites, 1 for Druze, and so on and so forth in every single district in the country. What does that mean? That if you are a non-sectarian, if you are secular, regardless of what ideology you carry, if you want to change the system, you are forced, whether you run for election or you vote in the election, that your voice counts, and you have to follow the sectarian divisions, acknowledge the sectarian division in the country. Things started getting worse and worse. On October 17, one of the ministers came up with an unpopular decision, and for a reason that no one understands, tens and hundreds and thousands of people took to the street. Within days, there was an uprising. People refer to it as the October 17 revolution in 2019. People all over the country, every city, every town, every village, went down there and said, it has to stop. Things have to stop. People should be held accountable, and things need to change. There was an amazing actually expression of solidarity when the Lebanese and others joined hands from the north of Lebanon to the south of Lebanon. It was a human chain of tens of thousands of people. It was interrupted in some places. Even that interruption in the human chain had a political connotation and political explanation. It was peaceful, but people were angry and demanding accountability. And of course, the response was brutal, and they were attacked and taken to prison and injured. Around the time that October 17 uprising started, the banks closed its doors for 2-3 weeks. And when they opened, all of us, Lebanese, non-Lebanese, anyone who has an account in the bank, we had no access to our money. The door was closed. From there on, the banks gave us a stipend. They will decide on how much money we can take from our saving account or our current account in Lebanese liras, in dollars, or whatever other currency. The Lebanese pound, the Lebanese currency collapsed. For 30 years, it was pegged at 1,500 liras per dollar. And quickly over the last 2 years, you see it's currently, I think today, it's close to 30,000 liras per dollar. What does this mean? Just to give you an illustration. So if your monthly salary was 1,500,000 liras at the end of 2019, that was $1,000 salary. Acceptable, decent, not great, but decent. Now, this same salary is $60. On top of it, You have no access to your money if you have any in the banks, which means that the purchasing power of the Lebanese totally collapsed, lost more than 90 to 95% of its value. Hyperinflation in the country, and a lot of frustration on top of all that. People depend on remittances, their loved ones outside Lebanon sending some dollars, and of course, humanitarian and financial aid from agencies, international and national. And then COVID-19 in February 2020. I'm not going to talk about COVID-19, and I'm not going to talk about the response to COVID-19. I'm just going to say that COVID-19 came here, and what it did politically, it stopped all protests in the street. Everybody went home. So it was lockdown, people went home, and every single expression of protest or anger went away because people were worried about their health, their loved ones, and they were taking this pandemic, as they should, very seriously. The European report summarizes this all in this quote: decades of political and financial mismanagement combined with COVID-19 and the August 2020 port of Beirut explosion have brought the country to its knees. The World Bank stipulates that the Lebanese crisis, it could be possibly among the top 3 most severe crisis episodes globally since the mid-19th century. This is a record for the country. The situation, again, according to this European report, poverty struck across the population, 74% of population under a sort of poverty, considered under the line of poverty. Syrian refugees, 90% in extreme poverty. Most people receive 2 hours of electricity per day. The healthcare sector is at breaking point. There's an exodus of health professionals, nurses, physicians, name it, and others. And there's a shortage of medicine and medical supplies. There's an issue, a very basic economic issue. What currency to use to charge people and to buy supplies? There are 2 different currencies that now don't talk to each other and that are not controlled. And to top it all, they expect that the economy will further shrink in 2022. Again, another addition with the Ukraine war, I didn't know that close to 80% of the wheat in Lebanon is actually imported from Ukraine. So this adds also to the challenge of even putting bread on the table. Of course, I did not forget the refugees, because the refugees are another dimension within the country that we need to address. In Lebanon, there is more than 1 million Syrian refugees that started influxing and coming to Lebanon as the war in Syria started in 2011. And on top of that, we talk about close to 300,000 Palestinian refugees with us for decades. This report from Brookings talk about the Syrian refugees being a crisis within a crisis. I would say this is a crisis on top of a crisis interacting with a crisis. And Syrians, most of them have no legal residency. Their 50% suffer from insecurity, food insecurity that doubled since 2019. 90% live in extreme poverty, almost doubled since 2019. The situation is not much different for the Lebanese. And the country also, this is a point that I will refer to later. The country also, when you look at the healthcare systems, there are multiple healthcare systems that address the needs of different populations. UNHCR deals with the refugees. UNRWA deals with the Palestinians. And then within Lebanese, depending whether you have private insurance or not, it's the Ministry of Health or Social Insurance that takes care of you. But we don't live in isolation. We're part of a region, and we need to understand a little bit more how the region is impacting us and impacting itself. This is the Arab world that we define as 22 states that are members of the League of Arab States. It's not a homogeneous region. It's quite heterogeneous. A lot of inequities. Actually, It comprises some of the wealthiest countries in the world and also some of the poorest countries in the world. I'm going to focus on two issues that define the region a big time. One of them is conflicts. Close to 50% of the Arab countries are in some kind of some sort of phase of political instability or an open war and conflict. What has changed? There were wars before. The Palestinian issue has been with us for more than 80 years. We had a civil war in Lebanon 1975 to 1990. There was the Iraq war, the Gulf I and Gulf II. And so you had these wars here and there. What has changed now in the region? That you have these multiple and concurrent conflicts at the same time. They're protracted. There are no more quick wars. And I would say that the situation now in the region and also globally with these conflicts, that this idea, previous idea that there's a pre-conflict phase, a during conflict phase, and after conflict phase, I think is dead. That's the end of it. We should declare this dead. You can no more divide conflicts into these three phases. They're mingled together. Even if a war stops, the conflict doesn't stop. And the fact that they are concurrent and multiple, they're speaking to each other. What's pre is post for others. And again, the high number of IDPs, internally displaced people and refugees, the highest in the world. National borders are being broken down within the country and across the region. And again, these wars are no more national and local wars. They are regionalized and they are internationalized. One thing that was striking in these wars that are happening now in the region, and unfortunately across other conflicts, is the weaponization of health, using health as a tool of war. It happened strikingly in Syria. The Syrian government and its allies were clearly attacking hospitals and healthcare workers. And this is happening in Yemen. Saudi Arabia attacking healthcare centers. It happened in Afghanistan. Even the US has attacked health centers, whether they claim it was not on purpose or not. The fact that healthcare facilities are becoming a target, and now we're seeing it also in Ukraine. This is what I was talking about these huge numbers of population that are shifting within these countries, breaking borders. You have Syrians in Turkey, more than 3 million. You have Syrians in Lebanon, more than 1 million. You have 6 million Syrians that have been shifted, displaced within the country itself. Jordan, name it. There's the conceptualization of a national border for a conflict is disappearing. Our colleague Omar Diwachi and his co-authors and colleagues have introduced this concept that refer to as therapeutic geographies, which they define as the reorganization of healthcare within and across borders because of these conditions. A Syrian refugee in Turkey is receiving a totally different care than a Syrian refugee in Jordan or Iraq or Lebanon, or if they've gone to Europe. And within the same country, they could be receiving also a different care. You can no more talk about national health system and consistent health system. My dear friend and colleague Fuad talks about these dichotomies that we need to start thinking about. The conflict phase versus the post-conflict. Are we dealing with emergencies or should we think long-term? Are we dealing with acute illnesses and health problems or chronic? Remember, these refugees are mostly from middle-income countries. We're talking cancer, chronic diabetes, heart disease. We're talking injuries. We're not talking about diarrhea and sanitation only. With healthcare systems, we need to address this issue. Are we running parallel healthcare systems? How can these systems talk to each other and integrate? Do we limit our work to humanitarian and then think of development later, or should they converse with each other at this point? And again, who is our target? Who's our population? Is it refugees, citizens? Who takes priority and who deals with whom? These are really very striking dichotomies that define not only the health outcomes, also the health system and the priorities. El Norte, people are moving where? Migrants, whether because of environmental migration or conflicts from Saharan Africa, North Africa, or our region, the Levant, everybody is moving north for more stability and for the hope for a better life and more stable life. The other issue in the Arab world, besides the conflicts, is the issue of ecological sustainability, which is actually threatening the survival of the region. I'm not going to spend time here, but I'm going to share numbers. If our population today in the Arab world is going to double or increase by 50%, if not double, from 350 people are saying to 500 or 600 million in 50 years, and if most of this shift is in urbanization and larger urban centers, and if this region is the most stressed, you see the red here, this region is the most stressed in water availability, and it's expected, if all these scenarios for climate change are correct, that will be the first region to run out of fresh water. And if this continues, that we're the largest importance of cereal in the world, because we have arid and semi-arid lands, you put all of these together and you could really see what could happen in the region in 20, 30, 40, or 50 years' time. And if these predictions and projections with climate change, our region will be the hottest in the globe and the least inhabitable in the globe. You're talking about migrations, in this case, environmental on top of conflict and economic, and you can size it up in your mind. The DPM of WHO AMRO speaks about the challenges to actually achieve SDGs, weak governance, fragmented healthcare, limited data, the emergencies and the conflicts, and of course, disparities and inequalities. I'm going to throw in a piece of history here for the region. And of course, this is a personal perspective. I think of 3 dates that are extremely important. 1918, this is when World War I ended, and there was a lot of aspiration in the Arab region, especially in the Levant, sort of the near Middle East, the Western Middle East, and there was a hope of an Arab kingdom, of independence, of self-governance. But again, it turns out that the British and the French Empire decided to split that region, create nation states that were put under mandate, a nicer word for colonialism, for 30 years. 1938 is another important date, and that's the time and the year when oil was discovered in Saudi Arabia, that transformed the region into becoming a very sensitive and important geopolitical area. And it links to the whole question of energy and sources of energy. And of course, the 1948, because the 1948, again, if you look at it, that year presents the birth of a new state in the region, the state of Israel, versus the fact that for the Palestinians and the Arab world, it is referred to as the catastrophe, and Nakba. It is the time when hundreds of thousands of Palestinians were uprooted and forced out. And that still defines our relationships, still defines the politics, still even defines these what we refer to as regional coalitions and orientation. For those who still think that I'm over claiming things, this line here in the Arab world, to the north of this line, you find Iran, Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon. This is one axis. This is an axis that is looking east. Now in Lebanon, there is a division, and maybe that's where some of the problems are. And to the south of this line, you have Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Egypt that are looking west. You find that most of these countries now are starting negotiating and accords with Israel. And again, it does define the politics and the social structure and stability or instability in the region. This is Turkey, again, interfering in Syria and Libya. And this is sort of the regionalization of the issue. This blue arrow here is the Nile River. And this Nile River, again, linking to water scarcity and link it to climate change. We know that what's happening now with Egypt, Sudan, and Ethiopia, and the dam in Ethiopia, this is a recipe for future conflict, whether we like it or not. And again, this is where climate change, migration, conflict, politics come together. And then you shouldn't be surprised why the Arab world spends more on military than health. It's the only such region in the whole world. Moving out to the globe, we're talking now about 84 million forcibly displaced people. I'm sorry about that. This was November 2021, because now we're talking about an extra 7 million Ukrainians that have been added to this statistic. And this number keeps increasing year after year. That tells you that there is a crisis in humanity and there is a crisis in our world. And it's not necessarily limited to one region or the other. Some of the victims that we sometimes forgot are the young, the children and the youth, what we refer to as the lost generation. And you can also build up with your imagination. What does it mean when you have a full generation that lost hope, that was displaced, didn't go to school, starved? What kind of future they have, and how can they rebuild their countries? Coming at the end to hope, I have ideas here, but because of time, I'm going to stop here, but share only one slide and say, I see a lot of hope in the young generation. We have handed over to the young generation a world in a total mess. And we're counting on this new generation, perhaps to do a better job than our generation, and perhaps try to introduce real change. We have ideas for hope and change at the level of the community and civil movements. The academic institutions have a role, and definitely there's an important direction that we should take, and that's global solidarity. With that, I think our hopes dwindle. It's still in our hands, but we call the shots. I don't want to take more time to leave time for questions and some interaction. Thank you.
Dr. Iman, thank you so much for this unbelievable presentation. It made me very emotional, I must say, and thank you for that final slide, the hope slide, because it really made me emotional and also reminded me why many of us got interested in public health. And as you made these this amazing presentation, it's really making me think about how can we prepare our students, the next sort of the future leaders in public health, to be far better prepared than we are in responding to armed conflict, to preventing these political determinants of it. Because frankly, you were bringing up the importance of history of public health, which I completely agree, values of public health. Honestly, I don't think we are spending enough time addressing those issues in our curriculum. So I'm just thinking, has the American University of Beirut Faculty of Health Sciences, have they redesigned their public health curriculum to better prepare the next generation of students to understand? Because armed conflict is kind of a new thing for many public health schools in the United States. I must say only a handful of them have some sort of a structured program for it. It's kind of seen as outside of the scope of public health. So how do we train the next generation of public health leaders to be far better prepared than we are in responding to armed conflict? That's just some question that came to my mind. And by the way, I want to ask the audience to put their questions in the chat box.
Yeah, so Gabi, you asked a very important question, but I don't want to limit it only to conflicts and wars. I think one of the issues that is at the heart of public health education and training, institutionally and at the level of individuals, is the whole concept of injustice. And I don't think we do the job that we're expected to do there. We wait for incidents to happen and we react to them. We have to be proactive and start thinking about what I'm not recommending that we only discuss politics in classes. We need to discuss epidemiology, statistics, environmental issues, every single core discipline within public health. But the students, the faculty, the institutions, when they work together, they need to understand the context. What we did at the faculty, we took a bold step. Actually, in our vision, we introduced that we're a school that is thriving or working or would like to be leaders, pushing for peace, justice, equity, and health. We've actually put peace, justice, and equity before health. And this is out of commitment. It doesn't mean that we're able to do it. But I think schools of public health need to realize that we need to address the core problem and start working. And we need to learn from each other. You need to instill values and sensitivity within the students, in addition to the skills that they need. And also we need to build institutions. And that's a role for a university like Yale, for a school like Yale School of Public Health and other schools here, that when they think about building capacity, it's not only about building the capacity of individual researchers here and there, building the capacity of institutions, because people leave. I might be in US, I might be in Lebanon, I might leave Lebanon, or someone of my colleagues might leave Lebanon. The university stays, and the investment should be at the institutional level, not only at the individual level. We've introduced a certificate and several courses on conflict within our MPH program.
Thank you. Opening up for questions from the audience. Let me just see the chat box. There's a question I see. What kind of partnerships that can help Lebanon deal with the current concurrent health crisis, particularly the partnership between academic institutes and other agencies in Lebanon?
Okay, I'm going to be here different levels. Some of them is very primitive like the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. That's sort of the bottom one down there. I was talking to Dean Vermont to Stan a few days ago, and I said, my visit here to Yale to spend a few months here gave me a breathing space. Give me at least I have electricity around me. I have internet. I have hot water. I don't have to worry about that every single minute of the day. And I can think. I can talk to other people. Even at that level, please do not overcomplicate it. Even at that level of if academics, scholars, researchers can come over, spend weeks or months and go back. I'm not talking about scholars at risk staying here. I'm talking about people who come, take a breather, and return. I'm talking about exchange of faculty, exchange of students, thinking about research that we can do together. There's a lot that we can learn from our partners in the global north, but there's a lot that our partners in the global north can learn from us. How do we deal with these problems? They're not in any textbook, frankly. They're not in any textbook. This is not what we teach our students. The textbook is being written, and we need to work on that. And I think this is one of the some of the questions and dichotomies that our friend Fuad has posed could be actually at the heart of some of this work that we can do together.
Sorry, I see a bunch of questions. What's your advice for understanding and comprehending the complex and multifaceted history of countries that improve public health professionals' ability to be sensitive and enable themselves to adequately address the challenges of these countries?
I'm not sure I get the question fully.
Very broad question. Let me ask, I see Mike Bayer, do you want to ask your questions? I see your hand. Raise your hand.
Thank you, Dr. Nuwayhid. Really, it's very, I think this is the perfect presentation. I wanted to say thank you, Dr. Nuwayhid, for a phenomenal presentation that really sums up decades of, inefficiency, a lot of problems in the region that kind of mostly gets summarized by, in Lebanon specifically, a country where people did not have to face any dictatorship, really had to, had the chance to go and vote. and they voted for the same people, left or right, who kind of had opposing political views, but for 40 years did not provide any sense of accountability. A system that was based on clientelism, where people who wanted to go and get, a surgery that they could not afford, they would go to the politician who would, go and pay for that procedure. If they wanted a clean access to clean water or a healthy and a good environment to live in, the clientelism of the politicians was the thing that they fueled. And you would only see that every 4 to 6 years whenever elections would happen. The other comment I wanted to talk about is about the healthcare education in Lebanon. The issue is that we do have a lot of public health education in Lebanon in universities such as AUB, but we do not have a focus or emphasis on healthcare management and healthcare administration, which does not, I think, in my opinion, equip the young Lebanese generation with the principles to create sustainable innovations. Because all what I see is a lot of times organizations, NGOs come into Lebanon, they do a project, they patch a certain situation, but we are not having a reform in a system that is already broken on so many levels. So I feel like if we need to make change, it has to be a big reform rather just patching or covering holes in the meantime. But thank you so much, Dr. Nuwayhid. That was an amazing presentation.
Michael, it's not that we have several programs. Maybe we need more. And at our university, we have an MPH program with concentration on health management and policy. We have an executive master in healthcare leadership, similarly with several other universities in the country. Do we need more? Yes. But again, I would like to see these programs contextualized and move from the technical of healthcare management to looking at issues that, like the issues I've described a while ago, of how to deal with these dichotomies and these complexities. And we have an opportunity to look at our condition, and I'm sorry to use the term, as a lab, as an experimental lab, to actually examine that and report on it and test it, and with total transparency over there.
Thank you.
I apologize. We are running out of time because I know Dr. Iman has another meeting right after, but Leah, why don't you ask the last question?
Thank you so much, Dr. Nuwayhid. I'm actually an AUB alumni myself. I just graduated from their medical school last year, and I came to the Yale School of Public Health to pursue a master in healthcare management. Thank you so much for your presentation. My question to you is, you mentioned the political determinants of health. And in a country like Lebanon, where a lot of the political influence is foreign, how can you take a proactive approach to public health within that political determinants of health sphere when so much of it is out of your hands? It's just the government that's either east or west, like you said, there's no continuity there. So I was just wondering, what's a proactive approach to that, in your opinion?
Definitely. When I used to present to the board of trustees at AUB and at many conferences, I used to say, we are an activist school of public health. And I don't think we should be ashamed of that. We need to start looking at these cases, Leah, and not necessarily with set answers, but we need to start examining these issues. We're not. So you're right that you have this general feeling that it's out of our hands. We have the most corrupt, perhaps, political system ever. It's sectarian. What can you do? I think what we can do is continue to work in spite of these obstacles. Continue dreaming of a better society and of a better country. For you as a physician, look beyond the clinical, look beyond the disease, to try to look at this wider disease that we're all suffering from, which is social injustice. I think these are the concepts that we need to start introducing. We haven't done enough, and that's why you're right. Maybe we're not ready. We don't know how to deal with it, but I think we need to challenge ourselves and commit to that, to start looking different. And this is not about Lebanon. I think it's the US as much as Europe, as much as Africa, as much as the Middle East, as much as Asia. We all need to do that. I see a note here from a dear friend saying we need to address the politics of public health. True. We need to not to be shy, to shy away from talking politics, not engaging in the politics necessarily, but talking politics and making sure that there is a political context and dimension to public health. It's not a technical field. Health is not a technical issue. Health is a political issue, is a social issue, and it's determined by the conditions we live in, we work in, by all these different structures that determine our lives and our futures and the future of our children.
Last question from Feha.
Thank you so much for the presentation. My name is Feha from Sudan. It's actually a comment more than a question. I just want to say at this point, the first, thank you for presenting this because I didn't know the situation in Lebanon, and it's so much replicated at many in the countries in the regions. One of the things that we are start talking about in Sudan that now we need to work outside the health field to tackle the issues of health. So we start to talk about now we need to politicize health to make sure the politician now they consider health as part of their agenda, which is not really happening because when a political decision happens and the health have been impacted, there is no actual action happen in terms of what can we do and so on. So thank you very much for this presentation, and we are looking forward for more discussion on this issue.
And I look forward to hearing you talking about Sudan again in the context of Africa and the Arab world, because your situation is as complex, if not more, than ours. Good luck to you.
Thank you for all the participants. Thank you so much, Dr. Iman. We should have made this much longer than an hour because there's lots and lots of interest in conversation with you, but hopefully we will have another talk with Dr. Iman. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you all. Appreciate it.